Hello everybody! Hi AAT students, welcome to LSBF TV, which is dedicated especially to all of you guys who are preparing for your AAT exams. As you might have gathered already from the chat, we are here today to help you with your preparation on the level 2 unit called Elements of Costing. So my name is Brigitte. And what I'm here to do with you today is take you through one of the practice assessment tasks which are already published on the AAT website. And as I'm doing this with you, as we are going through the actual task, I would be helping you with some really valuable technique that will make answering the question a lot easier, that if you learn how to adopt that technique and if you practice it when you're doing questions on your own, when you get to do the real practice assessment, or not the practice, the real AAT assessment, you will find it so much easier to answer the questions, so much easier to pass, and to pass with really high marks. And of course, I'm sure that this is what you all want to do, and this is why you're watching this session. So let's just get started and let me show you which task we're going to look at together. Let's have a look at our task. Now, as I've already said, it's elements of costing we're looking at, and we're looking at task which, as you might have realized if you managed already to have a look at the first requirement, it's one that is looking at the different types of cost behavior. Look at that, it says identify the type of cost behavior, and so here we would have to use our knowledge about how total costs change when the level of activity in the company changes. And that is for 6 marks, but notice this is only part A of the task, and what we always want to do is not immediately, once we have seen a task requirement, to start answering it, but to check what this requirement is about and then check the other task requirements as well to see which one of them is the easiest, because we always want to do the easiest things first, don't we? So we've just seen here that we have to decide whether the costs mentioned in that table are fixed, variable or semi-variable. And without paying too much attention, spending too much time on it, we can see that we've got different levels of activity, different numbers of units, and different costs for each level. So we have to use our knowledge about fixed and variable cost as well as semi-variable and try to do some workings and answer this. I don't know if you think that this is an easy one to do or a difficult one. Hopefully you find it easy. And yes, I will convince you that it's easy in just a little while, but let's have a look at the second part here of that task, just to make sure that, we know which one the easiest one is, and we can start with this one. So this little part here, part B of the same task, says complete the table by inserting all costs for the activity levels of 3,000 and 7,000. So again, look at this, it's looking at more cost behavior. We've got variable cost, fixed cost and total cost, and we've got different levels of activity, which we can, if you want, just for short, call LOFA, levels of activity, yes? Do you like that word, LOFA? I think it's a fantastic word, okay? So we've got different levels of activity, and for some of them, we've got the total cost already given to us, and we really have to fill in all the white boxes, not the shaded ones, of course, but all the white boxes in order to score full 6 marks. 1 box, 1 mark. Hopefully you've noticed already, okay? So you probably are thinking, okay, that is quite a lot to do, maybe, because we've got to fill in 6 boxes, so perhaps it's easier to go back to the first part of this task, to part A, where we just have to decide whether each one of the 3 cost types is fixed, variable or semi-variable. And yes, if that's your choice, I would say you've made the right choice, because if I were you, I would have started with this one as well. Starting with the easiest question part is always good for you guys, remember, because you really have your time in the exam limited. And because your time in the exam is limited, you can't really spend as long as you like in order to answer a question. And this is why it's a good idea to answer as many questions as you can during the assessment, isn't it? Of course, you want to answer all of them, and you want to make sure you score as many marks as possible. And if you do start with the easiest question parts, then you are likely to answer them quickly and correctly, which means not using up much time, but scoring marks. So you are achieving both your objectives in terms of your assessment towards your bigger one to pass. If you start with the difficult question part, trust me, what might happen is you end up spending a lot of time on that part. You might mess up the answer, you might even realize you are not getting it right, and that can make you feel so much less happy about yourself and about the assessment that when later on you see some easy question parts, you can't answer them simply because of your mental state, and you really don't want to find yourselves in that position. So always make sure you make this your exam approach, no matter whether you're sitting ELCO, elements of costing, whether you're sitting any AAT or any exam whatsoever. But learn that from me. Always start with the easiest things first, okay? Always. So let's see then, with this essential knowledge that we have revised already about the cost behavior, let's see what the three cost types are telling us here, what the three statements are telling us about the cost types. So we are told that at 9,000 units, this cost is 28,000, and at 12,000 units, the cost is 34,000 pounds. So notice we've got two levels of activity, which I can call, if you allow me, this unit 1 and total cost 1. So for each level of activity we have a cost, and then we've got here units 2, the second level of activity, the 12,000 units, and we've got total cost 2. Now, since we've got this, I'm going to color code them as well to make it easier for you to see. So this is the first activity level and the first total cost, and this here is the second activity level and the second total cost. When you have that kind of question, always look for the obvious things, all right? Always do the easiest things first, and we've already said that if it's a fixed cost, in total terms it will be constant. If it's variable cost, it will be constant per unit. And here we are given the total cost, aren't we? So the obvious thing to do is to check if any of them, if both of them are the same, because if both of these are the same, that would mean that the cost is fixed. But notice they're not the same, so we can clearly say that this cost type is not a fixed type. And before we go into calculation trying to figure out what it is, why don't we check the other one? The second one is saying that at 5,000 units, the cost is 520 per unit, and at 8,000 units the cost is 325 per unit. So again, we've got two different costs, but these costs now are per unit, notice, not total costs. So we've got cost per unit 1 and cost per unit 2. And again, we can do the obvious thing to check if they're the same, because if the cost per unit is the same, it's variable. But is it the same? What do you notice? Well, no, it's not. Unfortunately for us, these two costs are not the same, so the cost is definitely not variable, okay? And the last one, 11,000 units, cost of 49,500 in total terms, okay? And at 15,000 units, it is 67,500. So we've got total cost 1, we've got total cost 2, and if we check the obvious thing to see if they're the same, whether they're fixed costs, we can say unfortunately for us they are not. So what are they then? Well, now it's time to just do some calculations. And the thing is, one thing which is going to help us decide which cost is which cost behavior type is just to have that simple idea that, you know, I'm just going to have here the simple idea, and I'll put it in blue, is that the total cost TC is calculated by taking the number of units and multiplying them by the cost per unit. That's how we calculate it. And of course that means, if that is the case, if we want to calculate the cost per unit, we just rearrange this and we can say the cost per unit is equal to the total cost divided by the number of units. So this simple idea will help us now determine the cost behavior of the three types of cost. And what I'll do is I'll just have like a little table here. I'm just gonna split my page into three like this. Okay, this is our simple idea that we will be using, and I'm going to say this is our first cost type, this is our second cost type, and this is our third cost type. So we will be using that, and we will take the first one. Remember, we've got total cost and total units. So the total cost and units are given, which means we have to find the cost per unit, don't we? So we're going to say total cost 1, or let's say cost per unit 1. Let's just go straight like this. Cost per unit 1 is equal to, what did we say? Total cost divided by total units. So total cost 128,000. Let's have the 28,000 pounds divided by the number of units, which is 9,000 units. So come on then, take your calculators out and help me with the answer. How much does this come up to? You can tell me, you can raise me to see if you can get it before me. All right, let's have a look. Just going to allow a tiny bit more space here to be able to type it. So has anyone got it yet? How much is this, my friends? Oh yes, okay, thank you. I'm glad you got the same answer as me. I made that 3.11 per unit, okay? It is £3.11 per unit. Wonderful. Now let's do the second one, because that was cost per unit 1. If we do the second cost type, cost per unit 2, we will calculate, and we will use the second total cost, which is how much? 34,000 divided by the second number of units, level of activity, which is 12,000 units. How much is this? Come on, are we racing? Did anybody get the answer already? Let's have a look. I'm just going to look aside to see what you guys are saying here, okay? In the chat. Yay! Okay, wonderful. So I'm really glad you got the same number then, okay? And the same number as me is 2.83, yes, per unit. That's what we've got. Well, 283 per unit and 3.11 per unit. As we have now seen, not only that the total cost in the first type are different, so it's not fixed, but the cost per unit in the first type is also different, which means that the cost is also not variable, and that of course means it can only be semi-variable. So we've got one of the answers. Now we're going to do exactly the same for the second one. So we're going to take here, well, actually in the second cost type, let's think what we're given. We have the cost per unit, so we need the total cost. So total cost 1 is what we have to calculate, and total cost 1 is equal to the first number of units, which is 5,000 units, multiplied by the first cost per unit, which is 520. So what is that? Racing, did anybody get it? Because, yes, I think it's coming up to 26,000. Okay, that's fantastic. Now, how about total cost 2, using the information given? Same approach, number of units multiplied by the cost per unit, but now we've got 8,000 units. We have to multiply them by the cost per unit, which is 3.25. What did you guys get here? Yes, how nice is that? Well, it's 26,000 again. So we've just seen that the total cost in this cost type is the same at different levels of activity, which means this is then a fixed cost. It's not semi-variable. What about the last one? Well, let's have a look at the last one here. Well, in the last type we've got given what? Well, again we have the total cost, so we need cost per unit. So let's have a look. Cost per unit 1 will be equal to the first total cost, which is, how much is the first total cost? 49,500? Yes, 49,500. And we're going to divide this by the first number of units, 11,000 units. So, did anybody get the answer here? Come on guys, we are having a little race. How much? It's 450. Yeah, 450. Fantastic. So, we got 450 per unit here. Just wonder whether you can see that. Perhaps it's better if I just go to a new line here. Okay, so it's coming up to 450 per unit. Okay, and now let's do the second cost per unit from this type. Cost per unit 2. Well, total cost 67,500. We are again dividing the total cost by the total number of units. And the total number of units there is how many? 15,000. So this would be equal to, yay, yes, well, very well done. I think Imran got the right answer this time. Imran is saying that this is also 450, and he's saying that if the cost per unit is the same at different levels of activity, then it's a variable cost. Well done. And that's it. So really, once you know what you should be looking for, it's just a very simple exercise. But what about part B then? Complete the table by inserting all costs for activity levels of 3,000 and 7,000. Well, remember here we're going to use that simple idea that the total cost, as we already mentioned here, is the sum of the total fixed and total variable costs, remember? And so we will have to add to the variable cost the fixed cost in order to get the total cost. And given we already have the data for 2 levels of activity, we have 2 costs, it means we have to use the high-low method here. I do hope everybody remembers that the high-low method is that exciting method we use to split a cost into its fixed and variable element, so then we can use the data we get to forecast the costs at different levels of activity. So let's do that by reminding ourselves first of all about the 3 steps we have with the high-low method. So what are those 3 steps? Well, step 1 is to find the variable cost per unit, because we know that this one is constant at all levels of activity, isn't it? But then step 2, once we have found the variable cost per unit, is to find the second thing which is constant, and that is the total fixed cost. Yep. And then it's just time to forecast. So step 3 is to find the total cost for the new LOFA. Remember, LOFA is level of activity. So how do we do this? Well, to be able to do this, as we said, we need to have the data for 2 levels of activity and their total costs. And we have to identify which one of the activities is the lower one of the 2. Looking at this, we have 3,500 and 5,000 units, so clearly we can say that the 3,000, 5,000 units is the low level of activity of the 2, so we call it low LOFA, LL, which means that the 5,000 units, which is more than 3,500, is the high level of activity, we call it high LOFA. And of course, once we have identified the activities, we identified the costs, so the low LOFA has the low cost, that's what we call it here, the 22,500 would be the cost we call low cost LC, and the high level of activity of 5,000 is going to have the high cost, 27,000 that comes with it, high cost we call it HC. So that's all we need. And going back then to step 1, to be able to work out our variable cost per unit, I do hope you remember what we do is we take the change in the cost, so high cost minus low cost, divided by the change in the levels of activity, meaning it's high LOFA minus low LOFA. That's the formula if you wish. And so let's replace this with the numbers we've got here. High cost 27,000 minus low cost 22,500 divided. Now when you're doing the calculations, remember to use the brackets exactly in the way I'm using them here in your calculators, because if you're not careful you can make a simple mistake which is going to cost you the marks, okay, all the marks. So divided by, then you open a bracket again and you've got the 5,000 units minus the 3,500 units here. So did anybody get the answer already? I wonder if Imran is the best prepared student today. I don't know. Well, what is it? Well, I have the feeling that once you get this done, it comes up to 3 per unit. Am I right? And the answer is always, Brigitte, you're always right. Okay, so this is 3 per unit. Okay, and if that's the case, we can score a mark straight away because we need the variable cost for different levels of activities. And the variable cost, the total variable cost, TVC, is simply the variable cost per unit multiplied by the number of units. So if we have 3,000 units, when we multiply the 3,000 units by what we said here, £3 per unit, what we will get then as a total cost is 9,000. And the thing is, if we can score a mark quickly, let's just do it, okay? We can do that straight away here for the 7,000 units as well. So that's the number of units. Multiply them by the cost per unit, which is constant, so this will always be also £3 per unit. And that means that what we get then as a total cost would be, what, is that 21,000 by any chance? And the answer is yes, okay? Now in the exam, of course, you just have to enter your final cost. Don't do the calculation like that. I've just done it here to be able to show you how, you get it, okay? Then let's work out the fixed cost then. The fixed cost, how do we do that? Well, let's have a look. If we know that the total cost is the sum of the total fixed plus the total variable, and we already have a couple of total costs here, we can use one of them, whichever we like. My advice is to always go for the low cost. And we can just rearrange this, okay? So remember, total cost, TC, is the sum of the total fixed cost plus the total variable cost. So that means that the total cost, the total fixed cost would be, keep it on this side and put total variable on the other side. That would be total cost minus total variable cost. So replacing, using the low cost here, we're going to say low cost is 22,500 in total terms, and minus the low variable cost. Well, this is not given, but we can easily work it out because we know that the variable cost per unit is 3, and we can multiply the 3 by the number of units, which is 3,500. And you know what, perhaps you want to put brackets here just to be careful, all right, with your calculator, just not to make a silly mistake. And that comes up to how much, my friends? Well, that comes up to, I think, what is it? Did anybody work it out? 12,000, yeah? Well, that's fantastic, because we know that the total fixed cost of 12,000 is how much it's going to be everywhere. So now we can fill it in here in the box for 3,000 units. We can say this is, let's say, 12,000. And we can say that here it's going to be the same 12,000 because it's total fixed cost, it doesn't change. And all we have to do now is just add up these numbers to fill in the final box. So what do we get? For 3,000 units, we have 9 plus 12,000. Who got this? 21 total cost, wonderful. And here we've got for 7,000 units, 21 plus 12,000, and that is, of course, 33. And there you go. So we've done it all. We didn't even need to write how the total cost is done here because the way the question was laid out made it even easier. But one thing I hope you guys realized is that what you have to do is simply always the easiest things first. Well, thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.